The champagne glass in my hand trembled slightly as I stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom in downtown Chicago. I could feel them before I even saw them. The stares. That specific kind of stare that starts at your feet and crawls upward, dissecting every inch of you like you're a specimen under glass rather than a person walking into a wedding. My cousin Rebecca's wedding was supposed to be beautiful. The late afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. White roses and peonies decorated every surface, their perfume mixing with expensive cologne and the nervous energy that fills any room where two families merge. The string quartet played softly in the corner, a Vivaldi piece I recognized from my college days. Outside, Lake Michigan sparkled in the distance, the city skyline creating a perfect backdrop for what should have been a perfect day. But none of that beauty reached me. Not when I could feel every eye turning, every conversation pausing mid-sentence as I walked through those doors. I was wearing a simple navy dress that I'd spent 3 weeks searching for. Nothing revealing, nothing inappropriate. It hit just below my knees, had sleeves that covered my shoulders, and a neckline that wouldn't make anyone's grandmother clutch her pearls. The fabric was high quality, the cut was classic, and it fit me well. But the dress couldn't hide my body, my curves, the weight I carried that made strangers feel entitled to have opinions about my life, my health, my worth. The first whisper reached me before I'd taken 10 steps into the room. "Did you see her? I can't believe she wore that." Another voice joined in, slightly quieter, but still audible. "Someone should say something. It's not healthy." I kept my face neutral, my smile fixed in that expression I'd perfected over the years. The art of appearing unbothered when every fiber of your being wants to turn around and demand to know what gives anyone the right to judge you for simply existing in a body that didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. My Aunt Linda approached me first, her lips pursed in that way that meant a comment disguised as concern was coming. She was wearing a pale pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair styled in perfect waves that hadn't moved despite the lake breeze outside. "Sweetheart, you you certainly made an entrance." She air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume overpowering and floral. "Have you thought about that program I sent you? The one about healthy lifestyle changes? My friend Janet lost 30 pounds in 3 months. I really think it could help you." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Help me with what exactly? Help me become worthy of existing in public? Help me earn the right to attend family events without commentary? I smiled, my jaw tight. "I'm happy as I am, Aunt Linda, but thank you for thinking of me." Her eyebrows rose slightly, as if my contentment was somehow more shocking than my appearance, as if happiness in a body like mine was an impossibility she couldn't fathom. She patted my arm with her manicured hand and moved on, already turning to whisper something to my uncle's new wife, their heads bent together conspiratorially. I found my assigned table toward the back of the ballroom. Of course. Table 12, near the kitchen doors where the servers rushed in and out with their trays held high. Far enough from the main festivities that people could pretend I wasn't really there. Far enough that my presence wouldn't ruin anyone's wedding photos. My cousin James was already seated, scrolling through his phone with the concentration of someone avoiding small talk. He looked up as I sat down, offering a genuine smile that felt like water in a desert. "Hey, you made it. You look great, Olivia. That color really suits you." "Thanks, James. You clean up nice yourself." I meant it. His suit was well-tailored, and he'd gotten a fresh haircut that made him look older, more mature than the kid I remembered chasing around my parents' backyard. He glanced around the room, taking in the whispers that seemed to follow me like a shadow, then leaned closer. His voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Don't let them get to you. They're all so focused on appearances, they've forgotten what actually matters. Half the people in this room are miserable in their perfect-looking lives, but nobody talks about that." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't getting to me, but we both knew that would be a lie. So instead, I just nodded and took a long sip of my champagne, letting the bubbles distract me from the burning feeling in my chest. The ceremony was beautiful, even from my distant vantage point in the back rows. Rebecca looked radiant in her gown, all lace and silk and dreams come true. Her fiancé Marcus couldn't stop smiling as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and for a moment, I let myself get lost in the romance of it all, in the hope that love could conquer anything, even family judgment and social cruelty. But then the reception started, and the judgment intensified like a storm gathering strength. I watched as thin women in designer dresses glided past me to the dance floor, their movements effortless and celebrated. People complimented their dresses, their figures, their radiance. When I stood to refill my water glass at the bar, I felt the weight of assessment in every glance. Eyes tracked my movement across the room like I was performance art, something to be observed and critiqued. The buffet line was its own special torture, a gauntlet I had to walk through while feeling dozens of eyes on me. I could feel people watching what I put on my plate, calculating, judging, making assumptions about my entire life based on whether I chose salad or pasta, as if one meal could explain a body, as if they had any right to that explanation in the first place. I chose the salmon and roasted vegetables, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because that's genuinely what I wanted. The food looked delicious, prepared by one of Chicago's best catering companies. Yet I still caught my mother's friend Margaret whispering to her daughter at the next table, nodding in my direction with that expression of pity mixed with superiority that I'd come to recognize instantly. "It's such a shame," Margaret's voice carried just far enough for me to hear, probably intentionally. "She has such a pretty face. If she would just take care of herself, lose some weight, she could be so beautiful, such wasted potential." My jaw tightened, my fork hovering over my plate. But I kept walking, kept my head high, kept my silence, even though that silence was becoming heavier with every step, every whisper, every judgment. Because they didn't know. None of them knew. They didn't know about the chemotherapy that had ravaged my body 3 years ago, leaving me bald and weak and fighting for every breath. They didn't know about the medications I still took daily, the ones that made weight loss nearly impossible, no matter how much I exercised or how carefully I monitored every calorie. They didn't know about the breast cancer that had tried to kill me at 28 years old, when I should have been thinking about career advancement and maybe finding someone to build a life with, not whether I'd live to see 30. They didn't know about the double mastectomy and reconstruction that followed, the surgeries that left scars they couldn't see beneath my clothes. They didn't know about the nights I'd spent unable to sleep because the medication side effects made my entire body ache. They didn't know about the fear that still gripped me every time I felt the unusual pain, wondering if the cancer had returned. They didn't know that this body they judged so freely was a body that had survived when doctors had given me a 60% chance of making it 5 years. That every pound they scrutinized was evidence of life, of getting through something most of them couldn't begin to imagine. But I hadn't told them. I hadn't told anyone outside my immediate family and closest friends. It was my story to tell, on my terms, in my time. I'd wanted to keep some part of my life private, some part of me that wasn't defined by illness and treatment and the label of cancer survivor. So I sat at table 12, surrounded by distant cousins and family friends who didn't really know me and didn't seem interested in trying. And I let them whisper. I let them judge. I let them reduce me to nothing more than a body that didn't fit their standards, a problem they felt entitled to solve with their unsolicited advice. The evening crawled forward with excruciating slowness. I made small talk with the people at my table who bothered to engage with me, discussing safe topics like the weather and traffic and how beautiful the venue was. I watched Rebecca and Marcus cut their elaborate wedding cake, the photographer capturing every angle of their happiness. I watched them share their first dance to a song about forever, spinning across the floor while everyone applauded. I watched the bouquet toss, where Rebecca deliberately aimed toward a squealing group of single women near the front of the room. I hadn't been invited to join them, hadn't even been asked if I wanted to participate. Another small exclusion that added to all the others. As the DJ announced the last dance of the evening and couples filled the floor for a slow song, my phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from my best friend Sarah, who'd sent her regrets for missing the wedding due to a work commitment in New York. "How's it going? Remember, you're a warrior. They have no idea who they're judging. Don't let them make you forget what you've survived." I smiled at the screen, feeling tears prick at my eyes for the first time that night. Sarah knew. She'd been there through every treatment, every surgery, every moment when I thought I wouldn't make it. She'd held my hand during chemotherapy sessions, brought me food when I was too weak to cook, slept on an uncomfortable hospital chair more times than I could count. But what no one in this ballroom knew, what I was still carrying in silence like a secret weight, was that there was more to come. Something that would change everything. Something that would make every whisper, every judgment, every pitying glance feel very different in retrospect. I just had to wait for the right moment. I had to be ready to let the silence break. If you felt the sting of judgment, if you've ever been reduced to just your appearance, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches, because I have a feeling some of you understand exactly what I'm going through. And trust me, what comes next will surprise you. The weeks following Rebecca's wedding felt like living in an echo chamber where every sound was the same criticism played on repeat. Every family group chat seemed to circle back to discussions about health and wellness, always with a pointed message directed at me, even when my name wasn't mentioned directly. My mother's texts became more frequent, each one a thinly veiled suggestion wrapped in maternal concern. Just thinking of you, honey. There's a wonderful yoga studio that opened near the lake. Very beginner-friendly. They have classes specifically designed for people who are just starting their wellness journey. The phrase wellness journey made my stomach turn, as if my body was a destination I needed to reach rather than simply where I lived. I stared at the message on my phone as I sat in Dr. Morrison's waiting room on a gray Tuesday morning in early October. The rain pelted against the windows with a persistence that matched Chicago's autumn mood. The heating system hummed quietly, filling the space with artificial warmth that did nothing to ease the cold knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. This appointment had been scheduled for months, marked in my calendar with a simple star that meant more than anyone else would understand. 3 years post-treatment, and I still came every 6 months for scans and blood work, for poking and prodding, and the medical examination of a body I sometimes felt disconnected from. Most survivors I knew dreaded these appointments with a specific kind of fear the online support groups called scanxiety. That terror that this time, despite all the clean scans before, the cancer would be back. But today was different. Today, I wasn't here for just a routine checkup. The waiting room was familiar in the way hospitals and medical offices become when you spend enough time in them. The same magazines on the table, their covers curled at the edges. The same abstract art on the walls meant to be soothing, but somehow achieving the opposite effect. The same other patients, some with scarves covering bald heads, some looking perfectly healthy, but wearing that expression of worry that marked them as part of this club none of us wanted to join. "Olivia Chen?" The nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, her scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon hearts that seemed almost aggressively cheerful against the weight of what brought people here. I followed her back through the familiar hallway, past examination rooms I'd sat in countless times over the past 3 years. Each room held memories I both wanted to keep and desperately wanted to forget. Room 3 was where I'd first heard the words, "It's cancer." Room 7 was where I'd learned the chemotherapy was working. Room 5 was where I'd celebrated my first clean scan. Dr. Morrison's office was at the end of the hall, her walls covered with certificates and photographs of patients who'd rung the bell, that brass symbol of completing treatment that hung in the oncology ward. My own picture was up there somewhere, though I'd never looked for it. I wasn't ready to see myself that way, frozen in a moment of celebration that felt more like relief than victory. Dr. Morrison stood as I entered, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. She was wearing her white coat over a blue blouse, reading glasses perched on top of her head. She'd been my oncologist since my diagnosis, and I'd learned to read her expressions better than I could read my own mother's. Every slight change in her face could send my heart racing or calm my fears. Today, she was smiling, not the careful neutral smile doctors gave when they were about to deliver difficult news. A real smile that reached her eyes. "Sit down, Olivia. I have news, and I think you're going to want to be sitting for this." My heart hammered against my ribs as I sank into the leather chair across from her desk. Through the window behind her, I could see the rain continuing its assault on the city, Chicago's autumn making its presence known with typical Midwestern intensity. Dr. Morrison opened a folder on her desk, though I got the sense she'd already memorized everything inside it. Your latest scans came back completely clear. No evidence of disease, no suspicious markers in your blood work. Everything looks absolutely perfect. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Clean scans never stopped feeling like a miracle, even after multiple good results. But there's more, she continued, her smile widening. Given your markers and the time elapsed since your treatment ended, given the type of cancer you had and how well you responded to treatment, I'm officially declaring you NED. No evidence of disease. And from a statistical standpoint, you're now considered at low risk for recurrence. The words washed over me like a wave, each one landing with weight I couldn't quite process. 3 years. 3 years of living in the shadow of those cancer cells, of wondering if every headache or moment of fatigue meant it was back. 3 years of holding my breath between scans, of mentally preparing for bad news even while hoping for good. And now, officially, I could start to breathe again. Really? The word came out barely above a whisper, fragile and hopeful in a way I usually tried to hide. Really, Dr. Morrison confirmed, her voice warm with genuine happiness. You did it, Olivia. You fought hard, and you won. Tears burned in my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. I'd learned during treatment not to cry at good news, to save my tears for the hard moments. But this felt different. This felt like permission to finally believe I might have a future. But Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more serious, but still kind. There's something else we need to discuss. The reason I asked you to come in person rather than just calling with results. She folded her hands on her desk. The hormonal treatments you've been on, the ones causing the weight retention and the metabolic changes, we can start tapering those off now. Slowly, carefully, but we can begin the process. My breath caught. Really? You're sure it's safe? I'm sure. Your cancer was hormone receptor positive, which is why we kept you on the medication longer than some patients. But given your current status, the risk-benefit ratio has shifted. The benefits of staying on the medication are now outweighed by the quality of life impact they're having. Quality of life? I almost laughed at the clinical phrase that encompassed so much. The weight gain that had come with treatment. The judgment from family and strangers. The constant feeling of being trapped in a body that didn't feel like mine anymore. Olivia. Dr. Morrison's voice was firm now, pulling my attention back to her. I want to be very clear about something. The weight gain was never about lack of willpower or discipline or any of the things people have probably suggested to you. The medications you needed to survive quite literally changed your metabolism. They altered how your body processes food, stores fat, regulates hormones. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did everything right by staying on them, by prioritizing your life over your appearance. The tears came harder now. Someone with medical authority, someone who understood the science, was telling me what I'd needed to hear for 3 years. That my body's changes weren't a failure. That I hadn't done this to myself. Try telling that to my family, I said, my voice breaking on the words. Dr. Morrison's expression softened with understanding. She pulled out a tissue box from her desk drawer and slid it across to me. Have you told them? About the full extent of your treatment? About the medications and their side effects? I took a tissue, dabbing at my eyes and trying to salvage what was left of my makeup. My parents and my brother know everything. But extended family, most friends, people at work? No. I didn't want to be the cancer girl. I didn't want every conversation to be about illness and treatment and surviving. I wanted some part of my life to feel normal, to be about me as a person rather than me as a patient. That's completely understandable, Dr. Morrison said gently. Many of my patients feel the same way. The desire for normalcy after everything you've been through is natural. But Olivia, you've been carrying this alone. The judgment you've been facing from people who don't understand, the comments and suggestions and looks, you've been absorbing all of that without the context that would make them see how inappropriate their behavior has been. They shouldn't need to understand my medical history to treat me with basic respect, I said, more sharply than I intended. They shouldn't judge people's bodies at all, regardless of the reason behind how they look. You're absolutely right. They shouldn't. Dr. Oh. Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying me with the careful attention she usually reserved for examining scans. But we both know that in an ideal world and the real world are two very different places. I'm not telling you that you owe anyone an explanation. Your medical history is yours to share or not share as you see fit. But I am telling you, as someone who's watched you fight and survive and struggle with the aftermath, that you might feel lighter, metaphorically speaking, if you stopped carrying this secret like it's something to be ashamed of. Her words settled into my chest, heavy and true. I'd been protecting other people's comfort at the expense of my own peace. I'd been letting them judge me to avoid the discomfort of explaining why their judgment was so deeply wrong. What if they don't believe me? I asked quietly. What if they think I'm making excuses? Then that tells you exactly who they are, Dr. Morrison said firmly, and whether those are people who deserve space in your life. The rest of the appointment passed in a blur of instructions about tapering medications, scheduling follow-ups, and discussion about what to expect in the coming months. My body might or might not return to its pre-treatment state, Dr. Morrison explained. Some metabolic changes could be permanent, but I'd likely see some changes, and more importantly, I'd feel better overall as the medication side effects diminished. As I left the building, stepping out into the rain without bothering to open my umbrella, I felt something shift inside me. The cold October rain soaked through my jacket, plastering my hair to my face, but I barely noticed. For 3 years I'd been in survival mode. Head down, get through treatment, protect myself from additional pain by keeping people at a distance and keeping my truth hidden. The weight of secrecy, I realized, was heavier than the actual weight on my body. The silence I'd maintained to protect my privacy had become a prison of its own making. My phone buzzed as I walked toward the L station, the familiar rumble of the train audible even from a block away. Another family group text, this time from my cousin Jennifer, Rebecca's sister. Planning a family dinner next month? Excited to see everyone. Mom's making her famous lasagna and trying some new healthy recipes too. Should be delicious. The emphasis on healthy recipes wasn't subtle. Neither was the fact that the message was followed by 3 salad emojis and a running shoe. As if exercise was something I needed to be reminded of. As if my body was a problem the family needed to collectively solve. Something inside me snapped. Not the quiet resignation I'd been feeling, but real, hot anger that surged through my veins like fire. For the first time in 3 years, I let myself feel the full weight of the injustice. I had fought for my life. I had endured treatments that would have broken weaker people. I had survived chemotherapy and surgery, and months of feeling like death would be easier than fighting. I had done the impossible, and somehow I was supposed to apologize for the evidence of that survival being visible on my body. I stopped walking right there on Michigan Avenue, rain pouring down, people rushing past me with their umbrellas and their lives and their ignorance, and I made a decision. It was time to stop being silent, not because I owed anyone an explanation, but because I owed it to myself. I owed it to every person who'd ever been judged for their appearance without anyone knowing their story. I owed it to the version of myself who'd sat in that chemotherapy chair, bald and terrified, and wondering if she'd live to see 30. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table in my Lincoln Park apartment and began to write. Not a defensive explanation or a plea for understanding, but my truth. The diagnosis that came out of nowhere when I was 28 and felt invincible. The terror of hearing those words, "It's cancer." The months of treatment that stripped away everything I thought defined me. The surgeries, the medications, the side effects no one warned me would last years. And the judgment. The constant, exhausting judgment from people who knew nothing about what I'd been through. I wrote for hours, the rain continuing outside my window, the city lights blurring through the water streaming down the glass like the whole world was crying with me. When I finally finished, I had something that felt true and powerful and terrifying. But I didn't post it. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I needed to do first. One more moment that required my silence before I could break it. Rebecca had asked me months ago before the wedding if I would speak at her 1-month anniversary dinner. It was a family tradition, apparently, something her grandmother had started decades ago. A month after the wedding, the family gathered again to celebrate the couple and share advice and well wishes for their marriage. At the time, I'd agreed without thinking much about it. I thought it would be a small, intimate gathering, maybe just immediate family. I hadn't known it would include everyone who'd been at the wedding, everyone who'd judged me, whispered about me, reduced me to just my body. But now, that gathering felt like an opportunity, like the universe was handing me a stage, an audience, and a moment to transform all that judgment into something else entirely. I just had to find the courage to take it. What would you do in my position? Keep silent to keep the peace, or speak your truth and face the consequences? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving the storm, it's deciding when to let people know you weathered it. The invitation to Rebecca's 1-month anniversary dinner sat on my refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like the Chicago skyline that I'd bought as a tourist in my own city. Every time I walked past it, multiple times a day, my stomach tightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread that made it hard to focus on anything else. 3 weeks until the dinner. 3 weeks to decide if I was really going to do this, to speak my truth in front of everyone who judged me. 3 weeks that felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the decision looming over me like a thundercloud. My job as a grant writer for a nonprofit focused on cancer research had always felt meaningful, but lately every application I wrote, every story of a patient I included in funding proposals, felt deeply personal in a way it hadn't before. I was no longer writing about abstract concepts of survival and hope. I was writing about my own experience, filtered through the lens of others' stories. "You've been quiet lately," my coworker and friend Marcus said one afternoon as we grabbed coffee from the break room during our usual 3 o'clock caffeine run. Not Rebecca's Marcus, different Marcus, though the coincidence of names always made me smile. "Everything okay? You seem distracted." Marcus was one of the few people at work who knew about my medical history. He'd lost his sister to ovarian cancer 5 years ago, and there was an unspoken understanding between us, a club neither of us wanted to be part of, but were nonetheless. He understood the weight of survival in a way most people couldn't. I stirred sugar into my coffee, even though I usually drank it black. Nervous habit. I'm thinking about telling my extended family, about the cancer, all of it. The treatment, the medications, everything they don't know. He leaned against the counter, considering my words with the careful attention he gave to everything. "What's stopping you? You've been carrying this secret for years." "Fear, mostly." I watched the coffee swirl in my cup, the cream creating patterns that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Once I tell them, I can't take it back. It becomes the thing they know about me first. Every conversation, every interaction, every family gathering will be filtered through that knowledge. I'll be Olivia the cancer survivor instead of just Olivia. And right now, you're filtered through their judgment of your appearance, he pointed out gently, his voice soft enough that no one else in the break room could hear. Is that better? Is being Olivia whose body they feel entitled to comment on preferable to being Olivia who survived cancer? I laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a bitter recognition of truth. No, it's definitely not better. At least cancer survivor is accurate. At least it's the truth. So, what's the real fear? He tilted his head, studying me with the insight that came from his own experience with loss and grief. I was quiet for a moment, watching the steam rise from my coffee, thinking about how to put into words something I'd barely articulated to myself. That they'll feel guilty. That they'll apologize and feel terrible about how they treated me. And then I'll have to comfort them about their guilt over something they did to me. That the focus will shift to managing their feelings instead of addressing the actual issue. That I'll end up taking care of them emotionally when I should be the one being supported. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. That's valid. That's a real concern. And knowing your family, it's probably accurate. But you know what? Their guilt isn't your responsibility to manage. If they feel bad about how they treated you, that's actually appropriate. That's growth. That's them confronting their own behavior. You don't have to protect them from the consequences of their actions. His words stayed with me over the following days, echoing in my mind during quiet moments. I'd spent so long protecting other people from discomfort, making myself smaller emotionally, even as they made comments about my physical size, that I'd forgotten I had the right to take up space with my truth. I'd forgotten that sometimes making people uncomfortable was necessary for change. That weekend, I visited my parents at their house in Evanston, the suburb north of Chicago where I'd grown up. The trees lining their street were ablaze with autumn colors, reds and golds and oranges that would have been beautiful if I could focus on anything besides the conversation I needed to have. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived, classical music playing softly from the speaker on the counter. Chopin, her favorite. The smell of her famous beef stew filled the house, rich and comforting, and for a moment I was transported back to childhood, to a time before cancer, before judgment, when food was just food, and bodies were just bodies, and the world seemed simpler. "Sweetie, you're here!" She wrapped me in a hug, and I let myself sink into it, breathing in her familiar perfume. Whatever else was complicated about our relationship, whatever disagreements we'd had over the years, she'd been there through every treatment. She'd held my hand through the worst of it, slept in hospital chairs, researched every possible option. My father emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his head, a book in his hand. "There's my girl. How was the drive up? Traffic wasn't too bad, I hope." "Not bad. Traffic was light for once." I set my bag down by the door. Actually, I was hoping we could talk, all three of us. Something in my tone must have alerted them, because both their expressions shifted immediately to concern. We settled around the kitchen table, the place where all important family conversations had happened throughout my life. The table where I'd learned my grandmother had died, where I'd told them I'd gotten into college, where we'd cried together after my diagnosis. My brother Daniel was supposed to join us for dinner, but had texted that he'd be late, something about a client meeting running over. Part of me was relieved. This conversation was hard enough without an audience. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something. About the anniversary dinner." My mother's hand stilled on her wine glass, the liquid inside catching the light from the window. My father set down the book he'd been holding. "Is everything okay?" my father asked, his voice tight with worry. "Did something show up on your scans? Is the cancer back?" No, everything's clear." I rushed to reassure them, seeing the fear that flashed across both their faces. "Dr. Morrison gave me great news, actually. I'm officially NED, no evidence of disease, and we're starting to taper off some of the medications, the ones that have been causing all the weight issues." Relief flooded both their faces so completely that I felt guilty for scaring them, even unintentionally. "Then what is it, honey?" my mother asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Rebecca asked me to speak at her anniversary dinner, to give advice about marriage and family, and I'm thinking about telling everyone. About the cancer, the treatment, the medications, all of it. Everything they don't know, everything I've been hiding to protect my privacy." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken concerns and questions. "Are you sure?" my father finally asked, his voice measured and careful. "Once you tell them, you can't untell them. Your privacy, your right to keep that part of your life separate from family gatherings, that goes away forever. Is that really what you want? My privacy has been violated every time someone comments on my body," I said, more sharply than I intended, years of frustration bleeding into my tone. "Sorry. I just mean they've already made my appearance their business. They've already decided my body is something they have the right to discuss and judge and offer advice about. I'm just providing context they should have had before opening their mouths." My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with tears she was trying to hold back. "We support whatever you decide, sweetheart. You know that. We'll be right there beside you. But I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, are you doing this for you, or are you doing this to make them feel bad? To punish them for how they've treated you?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for weeks as I'd mentally rehearsed different versions of what I might say. "Both, maybe?" I admitted, meeting her gaze. "I'm tired of carrying this alone. I'm tired of being judged for something that was never in my control, for changes to my body that were the price of surviving. And yes, maybe part of me wants them to understand what their words and looks have done to me. What it feels like to be treated like you're less than human because your body doesn't match arbitrary beauty standards. Is that wrong? Does wanting them to feel uncomfortable about their behavior make me a bad person? It makes you human, my father said firmly, his lawyer voice coming through. But just be prepared, Liv. Some people won't react the way you hope. Some will make it about themselves, about their guilt and their feelings. Some won't believe the medication caused the weight gain. They'll think you're making excuses. Some will say, you should have told them sooner, that it's your fault for keeping it secret. People have a remarkable ability to avoid accountability, even when confronted with clear evidence of their wrongdoing. Let them, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, with the steel I found there. Let them show me exactly who they are. Let them prove whether they're capable of empathy and growth, or if they're going to remain stuck in their judgment. I'm done protecting people who haven't bothered to protect me. I'm done making myself small to accommodate their comfort. My mother squeezed my hand again, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Then we'll be right there beside you, honey. Whatever you need, whatever happens, we'll handle it together. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation and second-guessing. I wrote and rewrote what I wanted to say, trying to find the balance between honest and accusatory, between vulnerable and self-pitying, between too much and not enough. Every draft felt wrong in a different way. Too angry, too sad, too clinical, too emotional. Sarah came over one evening to help me practice, bringing wine and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. She sat on my couch, a glass of Pinot Grigio in hand, and listened as I stumbled through my speech for what felt like the 100th time. Each attempt felt more forced than the last, the words losing meaning through repetition. "Stop," she finally said, setting down her wine glass with a decisive clink. "Just stop. You're trying too hard to manage their emotions. You're crafting every sentence to minimize their discomfort, to make your truth more palatable, to soften the blow. Just tell your story. Tell them what happened. Tell them how it felt. Let them feel whatever they're going to feel." "But what if—" I started, the familiar anxiety rising in my throat. "No what ifs." She cut me off firmly but kindly. "You survived cancer. You endured treatments that most people can't even imagine. You don't owe anyone a perfectly packaged, comfortable version of that truth. Tell them what happened. Tell them how their judgment felt. Tell them why you stayed silent. And then let the chips fall where they may. Some people will get it. Some won't. That's not your problem to solve." I sank onto the couch beside her, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I watched my best friend fight for her life and then get treated like her body was a problem to be solved." She bumped her shoulder against mine affectionately. "You've got this, Liv. And no matter what happens, no matter how they react, you'll have said your truth. That matters. That counts for something." The night before the anniversary dinner, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the shadows from passing cars play across my ceiling, my mind running through every possible scenario like a movie I couldn't turn off. What if they didn't believe me? What if they accused me of playing the victim, of using cancer as an excuse? What if they said I was being dramatic, that I was ruining Rebecca's celebration? What if nothing changed at all, and they went right back to judging me the moment the shock wore off? But then another thought came, quieter but more insistent, pushing through the anxiety like a flower through concrete. What if everything changed? What if, by speaking my truth, I gave someone else permission to speak theirs? What if my story helped one person understand that bodies are complex, that appearance tells you nothing about health or worth or the battles someone is fighting? What if I could prevent one more person from experiencing the kind of judgment I'd endured? As dawn broke over Chicago, painting my bedroom in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost too beautiful for how I felt, I made my final decision. The city was waking up outside my window, the sounds of traffic and life beginning again, and I felt something shift inside me. I was going to do it. I was going to stand in front of everyone who judged me, everyone who'd made me feel small and wrong and less than, and tell them exactly what they'd been judging. I was going to name what they'd done and how it had felt. I was going to take back my story. And whatever happened after that, whatever reactions or consequences or fallout came, I would handle it, because I'd already survived the unsurvivable. Everything else was just noise. Have you ever had to decide between keeping peace and speaking your truth? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop protecting others from uncomfortable realities. What would you do? Let me know in the comments. The anniversary dinner was held at an upscale Italian restaurant in River North, Bella Notte, the kind of place with white tablecloths that looked crisp enough to cut, heavy silverware that spoke of old money and tradition, and waiters who seemed to materialize out of thin air to refill your water glass before you even noticed it was getting low. The kind of place that charged $30 for pasta and made you feel like you were getting a bargain. I arrived exactly on time, 7 o'clock, wearing a deep purple dress that my mother had helped me pick out during a shopping trip the week before. Not armor, she'd said as I'd stood in the dressing room, but confidence-made fabric. The color brought out my eyes, she'd insisted, made my skin glow. I'd bought it not because I believed her completely, but because I needed something that felt like choosing myself. The private dining room was already filling up when I walked in, following the hostess down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of Italy. The same faces from the wedding greeted me, the same people who'd whispered and stared 3 months ago. Aunt Linda, holding court near the bar in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My cousin Jennifer, looking perfect in what was probably a size 2 dress, her hair styled in beach waves that took effort to look effortless. Uncle Robert, Margaret, and a dozen others whose names I sometimes mixed up, but whose judgment I knew intimately. The room itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Candles flickered on every table. Fresh flowers, white roses, and eucalyptus created centerpieces that filled the air with a delicate perfume. String lights were woven through the exposed brick walls, creating an ambiance that was romantic and warm. It was the perfect setting for a celebration. Rebecca spotted me first and rushed over, her face bright with the happiness of someone still in the honeymoon phase of marriage. She looked radiant, glowing with that particular joy that comes from feeling loved and seen. Olivia, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you again for agreeing to speak tonight. It means so much to me. You've always been one of the people I admire most in our family. The guilt hit me immediately, a punch to the gut that took my breath away. She had no idea what I was about to do. This was her celebration, her moment to bask in the joy of her new marriage. And I was about to make it about something else entirely, about judgment and cancer and family dysfunction. Rebecca, I need to tell you something, I started, but she was already being pulled away by her new mother-in-law, someone calling her name from across the room, the demands of being the guest of honor, not allowing for lengthy conversations. We'll catch up later, she called over her shoulder, leaving me standing alone near the entrance with my carefully prepared speech feeling heavier by the second, like a stone I was carrying in my chest. You made it. James appeared at my elbow like a guardian angel, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered me one, red wine that caught the candlelight. You look nervous. Actually, you look terrified. What's going on? I took the wine gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. I'm about to tell everyone I had cancer, that I've been on medication that caused weight gain, that every comment they've made, every judgment, every pitying look has been directed at a cancer survivor. Nervous seems appropriate, don't you think? His eyes widened, his mouth forming a small O of surprise. Tonight? Here? At Rebecca's celebration? Rebecca asked me to give a speech about marriage and family. I'm going to give a different speech. One about what family should actually mean, about seeing people instead of judging them. He let out a low whistle, the kind you make when you know something significant is about to happen. Okay. Wow. Do you want moral support, or do you want me to stay out of the blast radius, because this is going to create some serious fallout? Despite everything, despite the anxiety clawing at my throat, I laughed. Moral support, please. I'm going to need all the friendly faces I can get. The cocktail hour crawled by with excruciating slowness. each minute feeling like an hour. I made small talk with relatives I barely knew, nodded through comments about the weather and work, and wasn't the wedding beautiful? I felt the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on my chest like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe normally, making me hyper-aware of every word I spoke. Every casual comment about my appearance felt magnified now, echoing in my head with new significance. Every suggestion disguised as concern, every compliment that was really criticism, every pitying glance felt like evidence I was collecting for a case I was about to present. "You look well," Aunt Linda said at one point, appearing beside me at the appetizer table. Her tone suggested she meant the opposite. "Are you still doing that desk job? So sedentary, sitting all day? Have you thought about something more active? My friend Janet's daughter got a job at a gym and lost so much weight. The employee discount alone would be worth it." I smiled, my jaw so tight it ached. "I'm very happy with my work, Aunt Linda. I find it meaningful and fulfilling." "Of course, dear. I just worry, Your health. At your age, you really should be taking better care of yourself before things get worse." She patted my arm with her manicured hand, her rings catching the light, and moved on to talk to another group. "No," I wanted to say. "You judge. You feel entitled to comment on my body. There's a difference between worry and judgment, and what you're doing is definitely the latter." Finally, mercifully, dinner was served. The pasta was excellent, perfectly al dente with a sauce that would have made my Italian grandmother proud. The wine flowed freely, loosening tongues and laughter. The toasts began as servers cleared the main course and brought out coffee and dessert. Rebecca's father spoke first, his voice thick with emotion as he welcomed Marcus into the family with genuine warmth. He told stories of Rebecca as a little girl, dreams she'd shared, and how Marcus embodied everything she'd hoped for. Marcus's best man told funny stories about their college years, tales of bad decisions and good friendship that had everyone laughing. Rebecca's grandmother, the one who'd started the anniversary dinner tradition 60 years ago, shared wisdom from her own 50-year marriage, her voice wavering but strong. And then Rebecca stood, tapping her wine glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to her. Before we wrap up the formal part of the evening, I have one more person I'd like to hear from. Her eyes found mine across the room. My cousin Olivia has always been someone I admired growing up. She's smart, kind, and resilient in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Olivia, would you share some thoughts with us? The room applauded politely as I stood, my legs shaking so badly I wasn't sure they'd support me. I'd left my written speech in my purse deliberately, folded up and ignored. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it from the heart, not from a script I'd agonized over. I needed to speak as me, not as a carefully edited version of myself. I walked to the front of the room, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the sound too loud in the expectant silence. All those faces turned toward me, curious, some already looking bored, anticipating platitudes about love and commitment. My parents sat near the front, my mother's face tight with worry and support, my father's hand covering hers on the table. "Thank you, Rebecca. And congratulations to both of you. Watching you two together, seeing how you support each other, seeing how Marcus looks at you like you're the most important person in any room, it's beautiful. It's what love should look like." I paused, taking a breath, feeling my heart pound so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. Rebecca asked me to share some wisdom about marriage and family, and I will, but probably not in the way anyone expected. Not in the way I'm sure she imagined when she asked me to speak. The room settled into attentive silence, curiosity piqued by the shift in my tone. I could feel them leaning forward slightly, sensing something significant was coming. 3 years ago, when I was 28 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps, shocked expressions, hands flying to mouths. Someone dropped a fork that clattered against a plate. I saw Aunt Linda's face go pale, saw Jennifer's eyes widen, saw my grandmother press her hand to her chest. I pressed on before anyone could interrupt, before anyone could derail this with questions or expressions of shock. I underwent 6 months of aggressive chemotherapy, followed by a double mastectomy and reconstruction. The treatment saved my life, but they came with side effects. Significant, lasting side effects that no one warns you about when you're just trying to survive. The medications I needed to prevent recurrence, the hormonal therapies that were essential to keeping me alive, they changed my metabolism completely. They caused weight gain that no amount of diet or exercise could prevent or reverse. I could see the understanding dawning on faces around the room, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. Some looked guilty, their faces flushing with the realization of what they'd done. Some looked confused, still not fully connecting the dots between my revelation and their behavior. So when I walked into Rebecca's wedding 3 months ago, when I stood in that ballroom doorway, the body you all stared at, whispered about, judged so freely and so harshly, that body had just survived something most of you can't imagine. That body had been poisoned with chemicals to kill cancer cells. That body had been cut open and reconstructed. That body had fought every single day just to keep me alive. My voice cracked, but I pushed through, refusing to let emotion derail me now. Every pound you scrutinized was evidence of life-saving treatment. Every suggestion about diets or exercise was a knife in a wound you didn't know existed. Every pitying look, every comment about my health, every implication that I just needed to try harder, to care more, to have more discipline. It was judgment of a cancer survivor who was doing everything humanly possible just to be there. Aunt Linda's face had gone from pale to red, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jennifer was staring at her plate, her shoulders shaking. My mother was crying silently, my father's arm around her shoulders, both of them proud and heartbroken at once. Rebecca's hand was over her mouth, tears flowing freely. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to be defined by illness. I didn't want every conversation to start with, "How are you feeling?" I didn't want every family gathering to revolve around cancer and treatment and side effects. I wanted some part of my life to feel normal, to be about me as a person with thoughts and interests, and a life beyond being a patient. I paused, looking around the room at all those faces, some sympathetic, some guilty, some still processing. But your judgment, your constant comments, your concern that was really just criticism in a prettier package, it didn't let me feel normal anyway. It made me feel wrong. It made me feel like I was failing at something, like my body was a problem I'd created through laziness or lack of care. It made me feel invisible as a person while being hypervisible as a body that didn't meet your standards. My voice grew stronger, the anger I'd been suppressing for 3 years finally finding its voice. So here's my advice about marriage and family, since that's what I was asked to share. Before you judge someone, before you comment on their appearance, before you decide someone's body is your business, remember that you have no idea what they're going through. You have no idea what medications they're on, what battles they're fighting in private, what it costs them just to show up and smile and pretend your words don't hurt. I looked directly at Rebecca, whose face was a mixture of shock and sadness and something that looked like pride. Love the people you claim to care about by actually seeing them, by asking questions instead of making assumptions, by offering support instead of suggestions they didn't ask for, by treating them like complete human beings whose worth isn't determined by how closely they conform to arbitrary beauty standards. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of my words. Then my brother Daniel, who'd arrived just in time for dinner, started clapping. Then James. Then, slowly, others joined in, though many looked too shocked to do more than stare, their hands frozen in their laps. I sat down, my entire body shaking with adrenaline and relief and terror at what I'd just done. Sarah, who'd snuck in during dinner without me noticing, appeared at my side and wrapped her arms around me tightly. "You did it," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with emotion. "You actually did it. I'm so proud of you." The rest of the evening was a blur of reactions that ranged across the entire emotional spectrum. Some people approached me with genuine apologies, tears streaming down their faces as they acknowledged how they'd treated me. Uncle Robert hugged me and said simply, "I'm sorry. I had no idea. That's no excuse, but I'm truly sorry." Aunt Linda couldn't look at me, gathering her things and leaving early with a migraine she claimed came on suddenly. I watched her go without comment, knowing that some people would rather flee than face what they'd done. Jennifer hugged me tightly, her whole body trembling. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. God, the things I said, the things I thought." She pulled back, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you for telling us, for trusting us with this. But there were others, the ones my father had warned me about. The ones who somehow made my revelation about their discomfort, who centered themselves in a story that wasn't theirs." "Well, you should have told us sooner," my cousin Mark said, his tone defensive. "How were we supposed to know if you didn't say anything? You can't blame us for not being mind readers." "I can blame you for judging someone's body in the first place," I replied quietly but firmly. "Whether I had cancer or not, whether there was a medical explanation or not, commenting on someone's weight is inappropriate. The cancer just makes it worse, not wrong for the first time." He walked away, clearly not ready to hear that, not ready to examine his own behavior beyond finding someone else to blame. Margaret approached me near the end of the evening, her expression sympathetic but her words revealing. "I just feel terrible that you went through all that alone. Why didn't you tell us? We could have supported you." "Could you have?" I wanted to ask. "Would you have stopped judging my body if you'd known? Or would you have just added pity to the judgment?" But I didn't say that. I just smiled and thanked her for her concern, too exhausted to engage further. Rebecca found me near the end of the night, as guests were starting to leave, as the candles were burning low and the staff were beginning to clean up. She approached slowly, her eyes red from crying, her perfect makeup smudged. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for not knowing, for not asking, for not seeing what was happening, for planning this dinner and asking you to speak without realizing what it would cost you emotionally." "Stop," I interrupted gently, taking her hands. "You didn't know because I didn't tell you. That was my choice and I don't regret it. And honestly, thank you for giving me the platform to finally tell everyone. I know this wasn't the celebration you planned. I know I made it heavier than it should have been." "Are you kidding?" She squeezed my hands tightly. This was exactly what I needed to hear on my anniversary. That love means seeing people, really seeing them, not just the surface. That marriage is about supporting each other through everything, even the things that aren't pretty or easy or comfortable. You taught everyone here what it means to really love someone." She hugged me tightly, and I felt tears finally come, the emotional dam I'd been holding back all night finally breaking. We stood there together, two cousins who'd grown up together but hadn't really known each other, and something shifted between us, something real and honest and valuable. As I left that night, walking out into the cool Chicago evening with Sarah at my side, the city lights reflecting off the Chicago River, I felt lighter than I had in 3 years. Not because everyone had reacted perfectly, not because all was forgiven and everything was fixed, but because I'd finally put down the weight of that secret. The silence I'd maintained for so long had finally been broken, and whatever came next would be built on truth instead of hiding. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked as we waited for our Uber, the night air crisp against our skin. "Terrified," I admitted. "Relieved, proud, guilty. About a dozen other things I don't have names for yet." "That sounds about right," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Welcome to life after silence. It's messy and complicated and so much better than the alternative." She was right. As I climbed into the car and headed home through the city I loved, past the places I'd lived and worked and fought to survive, I knew that whatever happened next, at least it would be real. Speaking your truth doesn't guarantee the reaction you hope for, but it does guarantee you're no longer carrying it alone. Have you ever had to choose between peace and honesty? Share your experience in the comments. 6 months after the anniversary dinner, I stood in front of a mirror in a boutique dressing room on Michigan Avenue, staring at a reflection I barely recognized. Not because my body had changed dramatically, though the medication taper had allowed some shifts in my metabolism, but because of something deeper, something that showed in my eyes and the way I carried myself. The woman looking back at me stood differently. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes clear and unashamed. There was a confidence there that had nothing to do with size or shape and everything to do with finally being at peace with my own story. "What do you think?" the shop assistant asked, peeking around the dressing room curtain. She was young, maybe early 20s, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "That color is stunning on you. Really brings out your eyes." I looked at the emerald green dress, the way it fit my body, the body that had survived so much, the body that had been judged and criticized and whispered about, but that had also carried me through the impossible. "I'll take it." The months following my revelation at Rebecca's dinner had been complicated, messy, and ultimately transformative in ways I never could have anticipated. Some family members had genuinely reflected on their behavior, had done the uncomfortable work of examining their own prejudices and biases. Others had distanced themselves, unable or unwilling to confront what they'd done, choosing instead to avoid me at family gatherings. The family dynamic had shifted irrevocably, the foundation we'd built on politeness and surface-level relationships cracking to reveal what was underneath, but not entirely in bad ways. Some relationships had ended or faded. Others had deepened in unexpected ways. My cousin Jennifer had become an unlikely ally, a friendship born from shared understanding. She'd called me 2 weeks after the dinner, her voice small and shaky over the phone. "I need to tell you something," she'd said. "Watching you speak that night, hearing about what you went through while I was obsessing over staying thin, it made me realize something about myself." "What's that?" I'd asked gently, sensing this was difficult for her. "I've been struggling with disordered eating for years, since high school, and watching everyone praise me for being thin while judging you for gaining weight, hearing them hold me up as some kind of success story while treating you like a cautionary tale, it made me realize how toxic it all is, how much damage we do to each other in the name of health or concern or whatever we want to call it." We'd started meeting for coffee every few weeks after that, building a relationship that was honest in a way our family relationships never had been. She'd started therapy, was working through years of disordered thoughts and behaviors. I'd shared resources from my own therapy journey, the work I'd done to heal not just physically, but emotionally from everything I'd been through. But the most unexpected change, the one that would alter the entire trajectory of my life, came from an email I received a month after the dinner. The subject line read, "Your story resonated. Opportunity to help others." It was from a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation despite sharing my last name. She ran a nonprofit organization focused on supporting young adults with cancer, particularly addressing the long-term side effects of treatment that no one talked about. The weight gain, the fertility issues, the early menopause, the financial devastation, the psychological trauma, all the things that continued long after treatment ended. She'd heard about my speech through a mutual acquaintance who'd been at the dinner, someone I barely knew, but who'd been moved enough to share my story. "We desperately need voices like yours," she'd written. "People who are willing to talk about what survivorship actually looks like, not the sanitized, wrapped-in-a-bow version we see in fundraising materials and awareness campaigns. The reality is messy and hard and often invisible. Would you be interested in speaking at our annual conference? We can't pay much, but your story could help so many people who feel alone in their experience." That speaking engagement, my first ever, had led to another, then another. I found myself sharing my story not to people who judged me, but to people who needed to hear it. Other survivors who felt ashamed of their post-treatment bodies, who thought they were failing at recovery because they couldn't lose weight, or because they were exhausted all the time, or because they couldn't just bounce back to their old lives. Healthcare providers who needed to understand the psychological impact of physical changes, who needed to learn how to talk to patients about side effects that lasted long after the cancer was gone. Families trying to support loved ones through treatment and beyond, who didn't understand why their well-meaning comments about diet and exercise were causing harm. My silence, the thing I'd maintained for so long to protect myself and my privacy, had transformed into a voice that helped others. Every time I spoke, someone would approach me afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking me for making them feel less alone, for giving them permission to stop apologizing for surviving. The organization eventually offered me a position, a full-time role leading their new initiative on survivorship and body image. It meant leaving my grant writing job, stepping away from the security and familiarity I'd built there. It meant putting myself out there in a much more public way, becoming a face and voice for an issue that many people wanted to ignore. But it also meant waking up every day knowing my work was directly helping people who were going through what I'd survived. It meant turning my pain into purpose, my silence into advocacy, my suffering into something that could ease someone else's burden. Today was my first day in the new role, and the emerald green dress felt like the right way to mark the occasion. I left the boutique with my purchase, the crisp November air hitting my face as I stepped out onto Michigan Avenue. The city was preparing for the holidays, window displays already featuring twinkling lights and winter scenes. I drove through familiar streets toward the organization's offices in the Loop, the traffic heavy but moving, the rhythm of the city matching the nervous energy in my chest. My phone buzzed at a red light. A text from my mother. "Good luck today, sweetheart. So proud of you. Dad and I are taking you to dinner tonight to celebrate. No arguments." Another text from Sarah. "Remember when you couldn't imagine telling anyone about your cancer? Look at you now. About to help hundreds of people tell their stories. You're amazing, and I love you." And one from Rebecca. "Saw your interview in the Tribune this morning. Marcus and I framed it and hung it in our home office. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up at our dinner. It changed more than you know. Changed me." The interview had run that morning, a feature in the lifestyle section about young women reshaping cancer advocacy and survivorship support. The reporter had been thorough and thoughtful, asking questions that got at the heart of what I was trying to do. She'd asked me what I wanted people to take away from my story, what message I hoped would resonate beyond my specific experience. That bodies are not projects, I'd said, the words coming easily because I'd lived them so deeply. They're not problems to be solved or evidence of moral failure. They're vessels that carry us through unimaginable things, and every single one deserves respect, regardless of size, shape, or how closely they conform to arbitrary beauty standards. We need to stop treating people like their appearance tells us anything meaningful about their character, their health, or their worth. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath the office building, I thought about that moment at Rebecca's wedding, standing in the ballroom doorway, feeling every judgmental stare like a physical assault. How small I'd felt. How wrong and ashamed and invisible, despite being hypervisible. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, that the judgment would lead to revelation, that the revelation would lead to transformation, that the silence would eventually become the loudest voice I'd ever had, I'm not sure she would have believed me, but she would have needed to hear it. The office was bright and welcoming, nothing like the sterile medical spaces I'd spent so much time in during treatment. Large windows let in natural light. Plants filled corners and sat on desks. The walls were covered not with the typical corporate art, but with photographs and quotes from survivors, a visual reminder of why everyone here showed up each day. Patricia greeted me at the entrance, her warmth immediate and genuine. She was in her 50s, 20 years cancer-free from Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she radiated the kind of strength that came from surviving and then choosing to help others survive too. "Olivia, welcome. We're so excited to have you on the team. Ready for your first day?" She gave me a tour, introducing me to the staff. Each person had their own connection to cancer, their own reason for being here. A graphic designer whose brother had died at 32 from a brain tumor. A program coordinator who was 5 years post-treatment herself, still dealing with neuropathy in her hands and feet. A fundraising director whose daughter was currently in remission from leukemia, who understood the terror of loving someone whose life hung in the balance. This was a tribe I'd never asked to join, but one that understood me in ways my own family sometimes couldn't. People who knew that survival was complicated, that remission didn't mean everything went back to normal, that the scars ran deeper than what could be seen on the surface. My office was small, but had a window overlooking the Chicago River, the water gray under the November sky. On the desk sat a welcome basket filled with tea, chocolate from a local artisan chocolatier, and a card signed by the entire team with messages of support and excitement. But it was the item placed carefully on top of the basket that made my eyes fill with tears. A bell. Small, brass, simple, beautiful. Like the ones cancer patients ring when they complete treatment, that ceremonial moment of celebration and relief and hope. The card attached read, "For all the times you fought in silence, for all the battles no one saw. Now let's make some noise together. Welcome to the team." I picked up the bell with trembling hands and rang it once, the clear, pure tone filling the small space and seeming to echo with all the silence I'd finally broken. That evening at dinner with my parents at a cozy Italian restaurant in their neighborhood, the same place we'd celebrated every major milestone in my life, I couldn't stop smiling. My father raised his glass in a toast, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. "To my daughter," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "who survived cancer and then survived the judgment that came after, who turned pain into purpose, who transformed silence into a voice that will help countless others, who refused to let anyone else's limitations define her worth. We're so incredibly proud of you, Liv. Your grandmother would have been too. Here's to new beginnings," my mother added, her own glass raised, tears streaming down her face. "To choosing yourself, to speaking your truth, to building a life that matters. You've always been stronger than you knew, sweetheart." As we clinked glasses, the crystal ringing with the same clear tone as that bell in my office, my phone buzzed. An email notification from someone named Maria Rodriguez, subject line, "Thank you for your story. You saved me today." I opened it while my parents chatted with the waiter about wine pairings, curiosity overriding my usual rule about not checking emails during family time. "Dear Olivia, I read your interview in the Tribune this morning, and I cried so hard I couldn't go into work. I'm 8 months post-treatment for lymphoma. I'm 26 years old. I've gained 40 pounds from the medications they have me on. My family keeps telling me I need to lose weight now that I'm better. Like the cancer is over, so I should just snap back to normal, like I should be grateful to be alive and stop complaining about side effects. My boyfriend left me last month because he said I'd let myself go. Reading your words, knowing someone else understands, knowing that someone is actually talking about this instead of pretending it's not happening. It's the first time I haven't felt completely alone in this. Thank you for speaking up. You gave me permission to stop apologizing for surviving. You gave me language to explain what I've been feeling but couldn't articulate. Thank you." I read the email twice, then a third time, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility settling onto my shoulders like a mantle I was finally ready to wear. This was why I'd spoken up at that dinner. This was why the discomfort and the tears and the difficult conversations had been worth it. One person feeling less alone. One person given permission to stop apologizing for their body's response to life-saving treatment. One person understanding they weren't failing, they were surviving. If that was all that came from my revelation, it would have been enough. But I knew now there would be more. So many more. Over the next few weeks, I received dozens of similar messages. From survivors who'd been carrying shame about their changed bodies. From family members who finally understood what their loved ones were going through and felt horrified by their own past comments. From people who'd been judged for their bodies and never knew how to push back, who finally had words for why that judgment was wrong, regardless of the reason behind their appearance. My first major project at the organization was creating a support program specifically for young adult survivors dealing with body image issues post-treatment. We called it the Silence Breakers, because that's what we all were. People who'd decided to stop carrying our stories alone, who refused to let shame dictate how we moved through the world. We designed a 12-week program that combined peer support groups with therapy, nutritional counseling that actually understood cancer treatment's metabolic impacts, and advocacy training for people who wanted to speak up about their experiences. Within a week of announcing it, we had a waiting list of over 100 people. 3 months into my new role, I got an unexpected call on a Tuesday afternoon. The name on my phone screen made my stomach clench. Aunt Linda. We hadn't spoken since the anniversary dinner. She'd avoided me at Thanksgiving, claiming she wasn't feeling well. At Christmas, she'd been polite but distant, speaking to me only when necessary and avoiding eye contact. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. "Hello? Olivia." Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its usual performative cheerfulness. "I need to apologize. Not the apology I gave you at the dinner when I was embarrassed and defensive and making it all about my feelings. A real one. I waited, saying nothing, giving her space to continue or not. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of therapy actually, about why I felt so entitled to comment on your body, on anyone's body. About why I made your medical condition about my discomfort and my guilt instead of about you and what you needed. She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. The truth is, I've spent my whole life terrified of gaining weight, of being judged the way I judged you. I've been on every diet that exists. I exercise obsessively. I weigh myself multiple times a day. My entire sense of worth is tied up in being thin, in maintaining control over my body. And when I saw you, when I saw someone who wasn't doing that, who wasn't playing by those rules, it terrified me. Because if you could exist without that constant vigilance, what did that say about the prison I'd built for myself? I sat down at my desk, looking out at the river, processing her words. I projected all my fears and insecurities onto you, she continued. I made your body my business because I needed to believe that weight was something you could control, that it was a choice, that it reflected some kind of moral failing. Because if it wasn't, if bodies could change for reasons beyond our control, then everything I'd built my identity on was a lie. Thank you for telling me that, I said quietly. That takes a lot of courage to examine and admit. I'm trying to do better, to be better. I'm working with a therapist who specializes in eating disorders. Turns out I've had one for 30 years and just called it being health conscious. I know it doesn't undo the hurt I caused you, but I wanted you to know that your words that night didn't just affect you. They affected all of us who needed to hear them, who needed to confront what we'd been doing. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long moment, watching the boats move along the river below, the city continuing its endless rhythm. Change was messy and slow, and sometimes it didn't come at all. But sometimes it did. Sometimes people surprised you. Sometimes speaking truth created ripples you never anticipated. The annual conference was scheduled for early spring, and I was slated to give the keynote address. As the date approached, I felt familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different now. Not the anxiety of keeping secrets or fear of judgment, but the anticipation of sharing truth with people who needed to hear it. The day of the conference, I stood backstage at the Navy Pier Convention Center, listening to the hum of conversation from the audience. Over 400 people had registered, most of them survivors, caregivers, or healthcare professionals. 400 people who'd chosen to spend their Saturday learning about survivorship, about the parts of cancer that extended far beyond the end of treatment. Patricia found me in the wings, placing a hand on my shoulder. You ready? I think so. It's strange, you know? A year ago, I couldn't imagine telling anyone about my cancer outside my immediate circle. Now I'm about to tell 400 strangers. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. That's the thing about surviving. It gives you a kind of fearlessness. What's anyone going to do to you that's worse than what you've already been through? You faced down death and won. Everything else is just details. She was right. I'd survived cancer. I'd survived treatment that tried to kill me to save me. I'd survived judgment and silence and my own shame. Everything else was manageable by comparison. As I walked onto that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces who understood exactly what it meant to fight for your life and then fight for your dignity afterward, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete and total freedom. My name is Olivia Chen, I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified through speakers that carried my words to every corner of the room. And 3 years ago, cancer tried to kill me. It failed. But what almost broke me afterward wasn't the disease itself. It was the judgment of people who thought my body was their business, who felt entitled to comment and criticize and offer unsolicited advice. I told them my story, all of it. The diagnosis that came out of nowhere. The treatment that saved my life but changed everything about how I lived in my body. The wedding, where I felt every stare like a physical blow. The silence I maintained for 3 years. And finally, the moment I decided to break it. I told them about the messages I'd received from people who finally felt seen. I told them about Aunt Linda's apology and Jennifer's recovery, and all the messy, complicated ways that speaking truth changes things. Sometimes for better, and sometimes just differently, but always more honestly. We're told that surviving cancer makes us warriors, I said, approaching my conclusion. And it does. We've fought battles most people can't imagine, but we're also warriors for surviving the aftermath. For navigating a world that wants our bodies to behave in certain ways, to look certain ways, to prove our health in ways they can see and approve of. For dealing with side effects that last years longer than treatment. For rebuilding lives that can never be exactly what they were before. I paused, looking out at the audience where I could see people nodding, crying, holding each other's hands, seeing themselves in my story. So here's what I want to leave you with today. Your body is not a before and after photo. It's not a problem to be solved or a project to be completed. It's not evidence of moral failure or lack of discipline. It's proof that you fought and won. Every scar, every pound, every change, every side effect that lingers, it's a testament to your strength. And anyone who can't see that, anyone who chooses to judge rather than support, doesn't deserve your explanation, your apology, or your silence. The applause started before I finished the last word, building until it filled the entire space like a wave. People stood, tears streaming down faces, and I saw myself reflected in every single one of them. All of us warriors, all of us survivors, all of us refusing to be reduced to just our bodies. Later, during the reception, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with a scarf wrapped around her head in a bright pattern that suggested recent hair loss, her skin pale in the way that spoke of active treatment. "I'm starting chemotherapy next month," she said quietly, her hands twisting together nervously. "Stage 3 breast cancer, and I'm terrified. Not just of the cancer or the treatment, but of everything after. Of how people will see me, how my body will change, whether I'll recognize myself anymore." I took her hands, stopping their anxious movement, making her look at me. "It's going to be hard," I told her honestly, not sugarcoating because she deserved truth more than platitudes. "Treatment is brutal. The side effects are real, and they last longer than anyone tells you. Your body will change in ways you can't predict or control. People will say things that hurt, often when they think they're being helpful. It's not fair, and it's not easy." I squeezed her hands gently. "But you're going to survive. You're going to get through this because you're already strong enough. You just don't know it yet. The cancer didn't create your strength, it's just going to reveal it. And when you come out the other side, when you're standing where I am now, you're going to know in your bones what you're capable of. Nothing will ever scare you the same way again, because you'll have already faced down the worst and won." She hugged me tightly, her whole body shaking, and I felt the circle completing. From silence to speech, from shame to pride, from hiding to helping. This was what it was all for. This moment, this connection, this passing of strength from one survivor to another. That night, I returned to my apartment and stood at the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, lit up against the dark sky. The city stretched out before me, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one carrying stories and struggles I'd never know. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from people who'd been at the conference, thanking me, sharing their own stories, asking how they could get involved in the Silence Breakers program. Each notification was another reminder that speaking up had been the right choice, even when it had been terrifying. But it was a text from Rebecca that made me smile the widest, that felt like the final piece clicking into place. "Saw so many photos from your keynote today. You were absolutely glowing. Marcus and I are in awe of you. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up at my dinner 6 months ago. I know it wasn't easy, I know you were scared. But it started all of this. You changed your life, and you're changing others. That's love in action. That's family done right." I thought about that word, love, real love, the kind that mattered. It wasn't about protecting people from uncomfortable truths or letting bad behavior slide to keep peace. It wasn't about making yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. It wasn't about silence and secrets and pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Real love was about seeing people fully, supporting them completely, giving them space to be exactly who they were. It was about speaking truth even when your voice shook. It was about choosing honesty over comfort, growth over stagnation, dignity over false peace. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same body that had been judged at that wedding 6 months ago. The same curves that strangers had felt entitled to comment on, that family had treated as a problem requiring their intervention. But I didn't see it the same way anymore. The shift wasn't in my body, though the medication taper had allowed some changes. The shift was in how I saw myself, how I understood my own story. I saw a survivor, a warrior who'd fought battles most people couldn't imagine and emerged victorious. A woman who'd taken her pain and transformed it into purpose, who'd turned judgment into advocacy, who'd refused to stay silent when speaking up could help others. I saw a body that had carried me through the impossible and come out the other side. A body that deserved respect and gratitude, not criticism and shame. A body that was mine, that I was finally at peace with. And for the first time in 3 years, maybe the first time in my entire life, when I looked at my reflection, I smiled without reservation or qualification. Not because I'd achieved some arbitrary standard of beauty or acceptability, but because I'd achieved something far more valuable. I'd found my voice. I'd claimed my story. I'd stopped letting other people's limitations define my worth. This was the ending no one at that wedding could have predicted. Not judgment and shame silencing me forever, but freedom and purpose growing from that silence. Not hiding and shrinking and apologizing for existing, but speaking and expanding and helping others find their own voices. The woman they'd judged by her body, the woman they'd reduced to nothing more than pounds and appearance, had become the woman who taught others they were so much more than their bodies could ever express. I thought about Maria Rodriguez, reading my interview and feeling less alone. I thought about the young woman starting treatment next month, carrying my words with her into battle. I thought about everyone who'd attended the conference, everyone who'd joined the Silence Breakers program, everyone whose life had been touched by my decision to speak up. One voice breaking the silence, one story shared honestly, one person choosing truth over comfort, and the ripples spreading outward, touching lives I'd never meet, creating change I'd never fully see. That, I realized, as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, exhausted but fulfilled in a way I'd never experienced before, was the most powerful transformation of all. Not changing my body to fit their standards, not making myself acceptable through weight loss or conformity, not apologizing for surviving in a body that bore the evidence of that survival, but changing how I showed up in the world, how I claimed space, how I refused to carry shame for things that were never shameful, how I transformed pain into power and silence into a voice that mattered. The judgment at that wedding had tried to make me smaller. Instead, it had revealed just how large I could become. Sometimes the ending we need isn't the one we planned. It's the one we create by refusing to stay silent, by turning our pain into purpose, by helping others find their voice through sharing our own. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever turned your struggle into strength, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Our stories have power when we share them. They create connections we never imagined possible. And sometimes, breaking your own silence gives someone else permission to break theirs.